And then to go over here, what I'm going to do quickly, just because that link expired, we'll just make sure that that's happening right now. I think this should be working. We'll do that. See, there we go. Good. That's our link for what we're doing currently. And then I'm just going to send an email to the Chevra in the world that needed to see that. We'll
for 80 people.
Say what?
So when I start class and it's like 80 people and humming and hawing.
Updated link. There we go. Okay. So now we can learn. Baruch Hashem. Baruch Hashem. So, Dr. Schlegel asked a question last week, which we are going to begin answering to a certain extent, which is, what exactly is the story with needing to conquer the land naturally or supernaturally? Why are we sending spies at all? This whole thing seems to be a farce. The whole thing seems to be ganz meshuga. We don't really seem to care about this that much. There we go. What do we need miracles to conquer the land of Israel? Are we supposed to do it ourselves? What exactly is this thing called conquering the land of Israel? It seems to be that there is a toss-up between miracles and natural order. And the beginning of Sefer Yehoshua leaves us, to a large extent, with more questions than answers. Because, on the one hand, you have two spies being sent, really to a, practically speaking, it seems to be some kind of strategic mission, something strategic. Exactly what that is, we've explained much of the, if you will, the metaphysics, the pneumius of what's going on in the Srachos story. But Tachlis, like, what are they doing? Like, what is their mission? The Pashtus, simply speaking, very hard to ascertain. In addition to the fact that we've pointed out that Yehoshua is Mashiach ben Yosef, who is entirely rooted in a natural order and the physical world. That's who he is, that's what he does. And yet we see that the very first thing that Yehoshua does getting to Eretz Yisrael is crossing the Yarden in a way that is decidedly and like very obviously exceedingly miraculous. Moreover, there's the conquering of the city of Yericho. Ha'ai is back to natural order, but Yericho is clearly miraculous. That whole story is miracles. And that leads us to the question of, do we need miracles to conquer the land of Israel? What are we supposed to be doing? Like, what's the goal here? And to that end, we need to take a look at Parakim. We're going to see just a tip at the beginning of Parakim, because there's a tremendous amount to understand. Really, Parakim, Dalet, and Hey work together to a large extent. They form a unit within themselves, but we're going to just see the beginning of Perek Gimel because the spies have returned, meaning the first Perek, as we've discussed, is who Yehoshua is as the continuation of Moshe and continuation as well as adaptation into the practicalities of living life. Perek Beis is the story of Yehoshua's Meraglim, and Perek Gimel begins this story of crossing the Yarden. And the pasuk says, "Vayashkem Yehoshua b'boker." Yehoshua gets up early in the morning. Vayisu meha shitim, and they traveled from the Shittim. And we pointed out that this is the area in which Bnei Israel had formerly failed miserably. They had fallen prey to the Yetzer Hara of the Bnei Midian, and it was from the challenge of the Shittim that the Meraglim of Yehoshua said. Vayavo ad hayarden, and they came to the Yarden River. Who Yehoshua v'chol bnei Yisrael, and the entirety of the Jewish people. Vayalinu sham terem yavar, and they slept over there before they crossed. Vayhi miktzei shloishes yomim, and it was at the end of 3 days. Vayavru hashadrim b'kerev ha'machane, and the soldiers, the police officers, they came through the camp. Vayitzavos ha'am leimar, and they told the people, they said, Kirischem es Aron bris Hashem אלוקיכם והכהנים הלוויים נושאים עושה ואתם תיסעו ממקומכם והלכתם אחריו. The officers, they instruct the people, when you see the Aron of the covenant of Hashem your God, the next two words, v'hakanim haleviyim, is a machlokas Rambam Ramban. Does this mean the Kohanim who are Leviyim, and therefore they carry the Aron in this instance? Or this is a unique chiv on the Kohanim to carry the Aron, but in general it was only the Leviyim that carried the Aron? This is machlokas Rambam Ramban, based on an understanding of this pasuk. No, Simosai, va'atem, what are you going to do? Tisu mimkamchem, you're going to get up from your place. V'alachtem acharav, you're going to follow the Aron. Ach, but rachokye benechem uvenav, you will ensure that there is a distance between you and the Aron. Alpayim amma, 2,000 amas. Bamida, that's the size of the space that you'll leave. You're going to give a head start to the Aron. Al tikruvu elav, do not get close. Leman asher tedu es haderech asher telchu ba, in that you should know the way that you should walk. Ki loy avartem baderech mitmol shalsham, you've never done this before. So give space that the Aron goes first. It's a strange connection. Okay. Vayomer Yehoshua el ha'am, then Yehoshua says to the people, his kadashu. What does his kadashu mean? To be mekadosh yourself, to prepare, some way, shape, manner, or form. Ki machar yaseh Hashem b'kirbechem nifla'os, because tomorrow Hashem is going to do incredible things. Did Hashem tell this to Yehoshua? Doesn't see. Vayomi Yehoshua lakanim. Yehoshua says to the Kohanim, Lemar, saying, Su'u es Aron habris, carry the Aron habris, v'ivru lifnei ha'am, and pass before the people, v'yisu es Aron habris, and they carried the Aron habris, v'yelchu lifnei ha'am, and they went before the people. Vayomer Hashem al Yehoshua. And then Hashem says to Yehoshua, Hayoim hazeh, today, achel gadelcha be'enei kol Yisrael, I will begin to display your greatness in front of the entirety of the Jewish people, asher yedun ki asher hayisi Moshe imach, so that they should know that the same way that I was with Moshe, I was with you. Ve'ata tetzaveh hakahanim and nosei Aron habris lemar, and you're going to tell the Kohanim, saying, Kavachem ad katzei mei hayarden bayarden tamodu. When you get to the edges of the Yarden, stand there. Stand there. That's it. Stand there. What's going to happen? Vayomi Yoshua b'nei Yisrael, Yehoshua says to b'nei Yisrael, Goshu heina, come, right? Come close, listen in. V'shimu es divrei Hashem lekechem, listen to what Hashem is saying. Vayomer Yehoshua says, Bazais teidun ki kel chai b'kirbechem. In this way you will know that Hashem, living God, is amongst you. It's a strange lashon, all the Mefarshim note, but it's kel chai. Kel chai. We don't see this lashon very often in Tanakh, almost never. V'harish yerish mipnechem es haknani v'es hachiti v'es hachivi v'es haprizi v'es hagigoshi v'ameri v'hayivusi. It's going to banish all of the nations from in front of you. Hinei Aron habris adoin kol haaretz over lifnechem b'Yarden. The Aron of the bris of the master of the whole earth is going to pass before you. Ve'ata, and now k'chulachem shnei asar ish mishivtei Yisrael ish echad lashavet. You're going to take 12 people, representative of each tribe. What are you going to do with them? Doesn't say it. V'haya kanach kapos raglei hakahanim nosei Aron Hashem adon kol haaretz b'mei hayarden. And when the feet of the Kohanim that are carrying the Aron of Hashem, who is the master of the whole world, when they touch the waters of the Yarden, Mei hayarden yikaresun, right? Yikaresun hamayim hayardim milamala v'yamdu neid echad. The waters that are flowing downstream will stop as one neid, like one pile, a heap. It's just going to pile up there. Did Hashem say this to Yehoshua, that this is what's going to happen? So far not. Yehoshua is saying this. How does he know? What's going on here? And then the pasuk says, "Vayibin Sha'am may Alehem Lavers Yarden." They leave their tents to cross the Yarden. Va'kahanim Nosei Aron Habris Lifnei Am, and the Kahanim carrying the Aron go before the people. Uchuvay Nosei Aron ad HaYarden Ragla Kahanim Nosei Aron Nitbelu Biktzei Hamayim VaYarden Malei Al Kol Gedresov Kol Yemei Katsir. The feet hit the waters of the Yarden. The Yarden was full. Was that time of year? V'yamdu hamayim hayardim lamala kamu neid echad harchit me'od be'adam. We read me'adam ha'ir ad asher mitzad sarsam v'yardim al yam harava yam hamelach tamu nichratu v'ha'am avru neged Yericho. They crossed through. We'll get to that pasuk a little later. What's going on with all the other waters? They crossed through, facing Yericho. V'yamdu akanim nosei Aron bris Hashem b'charava b'soich hayarden, and the Kahanim that are carrying the Aron stand in the middle of dry land, in the middle of the Jordan River. Hachein v'chol Yisrael ovrim b'charava ad asher tamu kol hagay la'avaras hayarden, and the entirety of the people pass through on dry land until everybody, the whole nation, has passed through the Jordan River. That's the story. Now, there's many peculiarities here, and there are many thematic connections to other places in Tanakh. Most obviously, Kriyas Yamsuf, right? There is a very obvious Kriyas Yamsuf parallel here. Very obvious. Like, that's very clear. The Tanakh also tells us that not only is there a Kriyas Yamsuf connection here, but later, the Tanakh is going to tell us what day did they cross. What was the date? The date of the crossing is the 10th day of the month of Nisan. Now that's a very important date because that was the date of Mishku Chulachem Tzayim. Right, this was Shabbos Haggadah. 10th day of the month of Nisan was the day that the Jewish people in Mitzrayim 40 years earlier had got their little shepsel and tied it to the bedpost, right? It's which, by the way, we've noted this once or twice before. The tying to the bedpost thing, it's very bizarre. It doesn't say in any of the psukim. But if you ask any kindergarten kid, what do they do with the sheep? They tied it to a bedpost. Right? That's ask your kids. Ask your kids. What did they do with the sheep? They tied to the bedpost. Most of our kids have never seen a bedpost, but tied to a bedpost. This means this bedpost. Okay, they tied to a bedpost. That was on the 10th day of the month of Nisan. So this is like a very Yetzias Mitzrayim kind of thing going on here, right? That's something that, to a very significant extent, we'll see much stronger parallels throughout the next two prakim, but there is a very clear parallel to Yetzias Mitzrayim of this being the capstone of that project that began with 4 Lashonos of Geula. So Moshe Rabbeinu tells the Jewish people in Mitzrayim, V'atzeisi, v'yitzalti, v'ga'alti, v'lakachti. I'm going to take you out of Mitzrayim, that's what it says. V'yitzalti, I'm going to save you from the Avodah. V'ga'alti eschem, and then v'lakachti eschem lila'am, I'm going to make you my people. But there is a 5th Lashon of Geula, which is I'm going to bring you to the land. This is it. This is the story of coming to the land. Here we are. We are coming to the land of Israel. We've noted one strangeness here is Kelchai, the Lashon Kelchai. We should put on the do not disturb here. The Lashon Kelchai is unique and strange. There is also HaKadosh Baruch Hu is referred to not just as Kelchai, but as Adon Kol Haaretz, the master of the whole earth. Adon Kol Haaretz. And that's twice. The Psukim point this out. Yeah.
Grammatical, is it possible to read it as Kel Chai, as a verb rather than an adjective?
Yeah, you could. You could.
I read it naturally.
So we'll note that there is one place in davening that we use the Lashon Kelchai. well, not quite davening, but in the siddur. It's at a bris milah. Kel chai tzureinu. We'll talk about bris milah as well, because there is a bris milah that's going to take place in the Sefer very soon. But let's just talk about this miracle that's about to happen. The Rambam writes that there's every miracle that HaKadosh Baruch Hu does. This is the Rambam in Yesodei HaTorah in Perek Zayin. That Vav Zayin, yeah. Every miracle that HaKadosh Baruch Hu does is for utilitarian purposes. There's a purpose to it. HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us man in the midbar because nope, it's not a hard question. We had to eat.
But why through a miracle? Isn't the idea that it specifically has to be done because it could have been done otherwise?
Possibly, but there was a deep utilitarian purpose to it, which was feeding the people. Water from a rock, give them to drink. Yes? Kriyas Yamsuf, the miracle, needed to get across. Good. Deviations from the natural order, distinct deviations from the natural order, the Rambam writes, are for utilitarian purposes. Now, the Ramban points out as well that miracles are also to instill emunah. It's a big machlokes Rambam Ramban. The Ramban at the end of Parshas Bayit, that all of our emunah in HaKadosh Baruch Hu is taught through the lessons of Yetzias Mitzrayim. We've learned that Ramban before. It's arguably one of two very famous Rambans, Al HaTorah. The other one, of course, is Kedoshim Tiyu. But utilitarian purposes, it seems to be that HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't do miracles. And yet this miracle of crossing the Yarden didn't seem to be necessary. We know this with certainty because just last parak, two guys crossed the Yarden at crossing points. They were crossing points to get across the river. Now, HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, what's going to happen here? HaKadosh Baruch Hu says that there is a purpose, and the purpose is that the people should believe in Yehoshua. They should understand that Hashem is with Yehoshua like he was with Moshe Rabbeinu. Beyond that, Yehoshua tells the people in Pasuk Yud, "B'zois teidun ki kel chai b'kirvechem." In this way, you're going to know that Hashem is in your midst. That's what Yehoshua says the miracle is about. And later in Perek it's going to be very clear that this miracle also had a very direct and impactful notoriety amongst the nations of Canaan. That they understood that like this is not something to mess with. Because Baruch Hu is doing miracles like we're gonna lay off here. Rachav, of course, had told the spies that we heard all the stories of the miracles that happened by Kriyas Yamsuf. So there's like this Namogu Kol Yoshvei Canaan understanding that everybody's gonna melt and fall away, and people are not going to want to fight with the Jews because there are miracles that are happening.
All the more reason why that information wasn't that impressive, because or vital, because they were going to split the sea anyway. I mean, that even if there wasn't a Mogu Koshvei Canaan at that point, it would have happened after this miracle, making all like the strategic part of that even more.
Right. So Dr. Schlegel is noting that once these miracles are happening, then surely we wouldn't need any strategic initiatives. We should just off we go.
Especially about them being scared, because they were going to be scared after this. So what's the difference if they're scared 2 weeks earlier with the brother?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Now, in order to begin to understand this a little bit, we're gonna take a look at Rashi quotes us on Pasuk Gimel, but we'll see this inside the Gemara in Maseches Saita. The Gemara in Maseches Saita and Lamed Gimel Amud Beis notes as follows. We'll zoom in here. Says the Gemara as follows. It's the bottom of the daf. Tana Rabbanin Ketzad Avru Yisrael es Hayarden. Brisa says it's a Tosefta. That's just important to note. Not because it would make such a difference between a Brisa and a Tosefta for this purpose, but because Rabbi Chaskel Abramsky wrote a parish on the Toseftas. And we're going to take a look at this in a few minutes. Tanraban Ketzad over Yisrael Yarden. How did they cross the Yarden? Says the Gemara, B'chol Yom Aron Noisei Achar Shnei Degalim. Every day throughout the 40 years in the Midbar, the Aron traveled after the 2 Degalim. Which 2 Degalim? So the camp was split into 4 main flags, right? The first 2 were Yehuda and Reuven. So says this Tosefta, the way that we traveled in the desert was 6 tribes at the front, 2 Degalim. Then the Mishkan, Kalim, and the Aron in the center, everything packed up, ready to roll. And then 2 Degalim at the back. So where's the Mishkan and where's the Aron in this travel? Center. Punkt in the middle. That's where it is. V'hayoim, and this day that they crossed the Yarden, Nasat Chila, went ahead. Shenemar hine Aron bris adon kol haaretz over lifnechem b'chol yom Aron bris adon kol haaretz over lifnechem. The Aron of the bris of the master of the entirety of the world is passing before you. It went first. Second, b'chol yom v'yom levim noisim es Aron v'hayoim nasu kahanim. Every day the levim would carry the Aron. Today it's the kahanim. Shenemar v'haya kenach kapas ragle kahanim noisei Aron Hashem. Pasuk says that it was the kahanim. Says the Brisa, will just finish this up because we're going to see this relates very deeply to the story of Yericho as well, and we're going to come back to this. Tanya Rabbi Yossi Omer b'shloshim mekamis nasu kahanim es ha'aron. There were 3 times that kahanim carried the Aron. K'she'avru es ha'yarden, when they crossed the Yarden, u'k'she'hesevu es Yericho, when they surrounded Yericho, k'she'hechsiru l'mkomim, when they returned it to its place, and there's differentiation exactly what that means. Others means the days of David or the days of Shlomo. And then the Gemara says, "V'kevan she nitbelu raglei kahanim b'mayim." The moment that the kahanim dipped their toes into the water, chazor amayim la'achareim, the waters switched backwards. Shenemar v'chavay noisei Aron ad hayarden, when the carriers of the Aron came to the Yarden, v'yamdu amayim hayarden milamala, the waters stopped. Kamu neid echad. Like one pillow, like one pot. V'kama goven shalmayim, and how high was the water? So this the Gemara says, Shneim asar mil al Shneim asar mil keneged machne Yisrael. Yehuda is of the opinion that it was size of 12 mil by 12 mil, which is the size of the machne, which is like a very, very, very high water column. And we'll get back to this after this Medrash a little later. Okay. There is a uniqueness to the story, and that is that the Aron is going ahead. The Aron is going ahead. Why? Why is the Aron going ahead? So, in order to begin to understand this a little bit, we're going to take a look at a Sfar. On a pasuk that you're all familiar with. Vayhi b'nsaya ha'aron vayom Moshe. When the Aron would travel, this is all the way back in Sefer Bamidbar, Parshas Ba'aloscha, surrounded by 2 nuns. Vayhi b'nsaya ha'aron vayom Moshe. When the Aron would travel, vayom Moshe would say, Kuma Hashem, rise up Hashem, vayafutza oivecha, and your enemies will be scattered. Ve'yanusa mesanecha mipanecha, and those that hate you will flee from before you. What is this description? Is this miracles? What do you say? Miracles? Doesn't sound like miracles.
Why are they scattering? It just means they're good, I guess.
Is that Derech HaTeva? Strange, right? What does that pasuk mean? We say by him and Saran, right? What does that mean? What is Hashem going to do? Hashem's going to rise up. How? Why? What's going on? Why is that going to happen? Why would that ever be the case?
Is that part of Moshe's statement, or that's what happens when Moshe says Kuma Hashem, or does he say Kuma Hashem ve'afutza? Where does the period go, or the comma in this case?
So it's a good question.
How else could you read it? What do you mean?
I mean, Vayom Moshe Kuma Hashem. Period.
And what?
Ve'afutza Eivecha, but that's still talking to you. So Moshe Rabbeinu is addressing Hashem. Right? Says the Svarna. Vayimtza Aron lalechas v'likanes l'Eretz Yisrael. This is Bedafka talking about the entry into Eretz Yisrael. Now, why is Sefer Bamidbar talking about the entry into Eretz Yisrael? Well, this is important to understand because this is exactly what they were about to do. Just before this, Moshe Rabbeinu says to Yisro, we're about to go to Eretz Yisrael. You want to come? Rashi points out they were 3 days away from Eretz Yisrael. 3 days away.
But this sounds like something that you consistently did. This is what you used to say in respect to it. It doesn't sound like it was at a particular point in time.
So let's take a look. I'll open this up and show this to you inside the Chumash, because this is worth seeing inside. This is Bamidbar Perek, end of Perek Yud, really. The pasuk says as follows. This is the story the Jewish people are traveling. Moshe says to Chava ben Ruel, Hamidyani Chayzer Moshe, says to him, Nosim anachnu elo hakoyim asher amar Hashem, Osei etein lachem. We're going. We're on our way to the place that you've told us, that Hashem has told us we're going to. L'cha itanu. Come with us. Come with us. Ve'tavnu lach. We're going to do good for you. Ki Hashem diber tov al Yisrael. As Hashem has spoken good about the Jewish people, there's a lot to speak about that. And Yisro says, I'm not coming with you. Ki im el artzi ve'el malati eleich. I'm going home. And Moshe begs him. He says, Al nat azov us. Don't leave us. Okay. V'hayaki selechim, if you come with us, it's going to be good for you. Like Hashem has done good for us, we'll make sure you're included. And then the pasuk says like this: Vayisu mehar Hashem derech shloishes yom. They traveled 3 days, a journey of 3 days. V'Aron bris Hashem nosea where? Lifnei derech shloishes yom. Lasur lahem menucha. The Aron is traveling 3 days journey ahead. Lasur lahem menucha, to chart out a easy way to travel. Right? Chazal say that when the Aron was traveling in front of them, the Aron was killing all the snakes and scorpions and leveling mountains and etc. Make it a smooth journey. V'anan Hashem alehem yomam v'nasam min ha'machaneh, and the cloud of Hashem was above them when they traveled from the machaneh. This is different. What is different here? Where was the Anan usually when they traveled? When they traveled. So there was the Anan and Yaakov surrounded them, but where was the Amud Anan? You know this from Parshas Beshalach. Where was the Amud Anan? Went ahead of them. The Anan was at the front of the camp. The Anan was leading the way. And where was the Aron? In the middle. Now this is different.
When they would travel, you're saying?
Yeah.
They could follow.
They followed the Anan, and the Aron was in the middle. But this is different. Now the Anan is on top of them, and the Aron is at the front. Aron's at the front. And then in this context, Vayhim sa Aron Vayom Moshe Kuma Hashem Vayafutza Vecha, when the Aron would travel, meaning during these 3 days of journey, Moshe would say, rise up Hashem and scatter your enemies, and your enemies will be scattered. He said, let's see. Yep, look at that. They even translated in the passive voice, in the, I don't know, I think this is the JPS, something. Okay. And let your enemies be scattered, and your enemies will be scattered. It's not and scatter your enemies. Hashem's not scattering anything. And your enemies will be scattered. Zog the Svarna HaKodesh. We'll make the text a little bigger here. Here we go. Kuma Hashem ve'yafutza evecha. Look at this. Says the Svarna, Ki amnam lulei yishalchu meraglim, if not for the fact that they sent the meraglim, hayu nichnasim bezulas milchama. They would have entered into Eretz Yisrael without war. No war. Shehayu ha'umas borchim, because the nations would have fled. Why would they have fled? Ve'yanusim esanecha mipanecha, pen yavo Yisrael lahachrimam, lest the Jewish people come to destroy them. What does that mean? Is this a miracle? What is this?
Psychological warfare.
This is bigger army diplomacy, right? You don't want to mess with us because you're not going to win. Why not?
God is fighting.
But God's not fighting for us. Says the Sforno, you're going to enter into Eretz Yisrael, and you're not going to have to fight any battles. You're going to have an army, absolutely, but they're just going to run away from you. They will either run or surrender, or
it's just mechanistic. I mean, this is how it works. When the Aron is in front of you, that's just that's just the reaction.
why?
Why is it the reaction?
Yeah, why is that the reaction?
People believed in the divinity of it, and they were terrified.
Okay,
You see it repeatedly
in Sefer Yehoshua.
Yes.
In Sefer Yehoshua, and yet in Sefer Yehoshua they don't run away. Rachav says everybody's terrified, but nobody surrenders. Why not? Strange, right? Nobody surrenders. They're all terrified, but nobody surrenders.
Forgive on.
Say what?
So forgive on.
Okay, the Givonim, they have their trick. But Rachav says everybody is everybody is petrified, everybody is terrified, everybody is shaking in their boots, and yet, nobody's going to surrender. Or flee. Nobody's running away. And they are having to fight wars. Why do they have to fight wars? The Aron, the bris of Hashem, is in front of them. Says the Svarna, if not for the Meraglim, they would have gone in without Milchama. What happened as a result of the Meraglim, and truthfully, with the beginning of that story, is the very next pasuk in Sefer Bamidbar, Vehiam Kemis'oinim. They started complaining. So it started like delaying the journey. Once the journey was delayed, so everything kind of went wrong. Not learning Sefer Bamidbar now, but understand that it all begins with Mis'oinim, or really, arguably it started with, and we'll get to this a little bit, Vayisu mehar Hashem derech shloshes yomim. So Chazal say on this, Ketina kabarech miveis hasefer. They left Har Hashem, they left the mountain of Hashem, they ran away. They didn't want more mitzvahs. Don't give us more mitzvahs, we're booking out of here. We'll discuss what that means a little bit later. But let's just understand, what is the purpose of this Aron traveling in front of them? The Aron is going to travel in front for what? What is the purpose of the Aron traveling in front of them? To understand this, I want to show you this gorgeous mahalach from Rav Chaskel Abramsky in Chazon Yechazkel, which is a magnificent and monumental multi-volume work on Toseftas. Not a lot of people spend their significant time understanding Toseftas. Chazon Yechazkel is one of the greatest contributions to the world of Tosefta. Says Rav Chaskel Abramsky as follows. We'll do it like this so that Chaver can see. This paragraph over here. K'she'over Yisrael es Yarden, meaning quotes from the Gemara that we saw in Sota. That's a Tosefta, in the 7th and 8th parak of Sota. Those are the two pieces that we saw. Says the Gemara, K'she'over Yisrael es Yarden. One of the times that the Kohanim carried was they crossed the Yarden, and another time was when they surrounded Yericho, and another one was when they returned the Aron to its place. Says Rav Chaskel Abramsky as follows: Shebishloishim mekamis halalu lo yihayisah nesiyas Aron kechelek min nesiyas hamishkan shenesiyasot beleviyim. Every other time that the Aron is carried, it is carried as a part of the Mishkan. It is carried as a chelek of the Mishkan, and therefore it's carried by the Levim, because the Mishkan is carried by the Levim. Here, but here the Aron is being carried independent of the Mishkan. This is the Aron. The Aron. This is the Aron without any any trappings, without any surroundings, without any levush, if you will. It's not dressed up. It's the Aron, the real deal, the thing itself. When the Jewish people crossed the Yarden, as Aron Abris, they carried it in front of the nation, in order to dry up the waters of the Yarden. The entirety of the Jewish people would cross through on dry land. But when the Levim carried the Aron as part of the Mishkan, then the Aron was part of the Mishkan, traveled within the camp between the first two Degalim and the last two Degalim. But now it is going ahead. The same thing by Yericho. They carried it around so that the walls of Yericho would fall. When David was running away from Absalom, we'll get there. It wasn't about the Mishkan, and we'll get there when we get to Sefer Shmuel. Says Rav Chaskel Abramsky, there is a uniqueness to carrying the Aron by itself. And that is, when you carry the Aron by itself, it does miracles. The Aron does miracles. Miraculous things happen. For example, you are familiar with, probably from the Mefarshim in this parak, that and from the Haftarah of Parshas Achremos, the story of somebody dying, touching the Aron, right? We'll see that in Sefer Shmuel as well. That the Aron is noiseh es noisav. The Aron carries those that carry it. What does it mean it carries those that carry it? Sounds like they were floating, right? Sounds like they were levitating. And yet their feet are touching the waters of the Yarden. So what does that mean? That's noiseh es noisav. You might also be familiar with the Gemara. Chazal tell us this is Masechus Megillah, that the Aron eina min amida. Aron took up no space. The Gemara does a calculation of how big the Aron was and how big the Kodesh Kodashim was. Comes out that the Aron didn't take up space. It's a very strange thing, hard to understand. Those that holding in general relativity have a very hard time with like, what's pshat. Aron is not taking up any space. And here we see that the Aron comes to the Yarden and the waters dry up. And the Aron surrounds Yericho and the walls fall. What is this thing going on with the Aron? And this is only the Aron, unadulterated Aron. Unadulterated, the Aron, non-GMO Aron. There's no Mishkan around it. There's nothing. It is the Aron itself. The Aron which contains within it the Luchas Ha'edus, Luchas Abris. And when you carry this thing, miracles happen around it. So last time we discussed the Shalach Kodesh at the beginning of Sefer Vayikra, that once upon a time all things were the same Kodesh, the same level of transcendency. All things were Yom Kippur Kohen Gadol Kodesh Kodashim, which is terrifying. That's a terrifying state of being. Because imagine for a moment the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur, inside of the Kodesh Kodashim, there was a tremendous period of trepidation and preparation for that. Right? That was scary. It was a scary thing to engage in that thing called Yom Kippur, Kohen Gadol, inside of the Kodesh Kodashim, standing by the Aron. Because ultimately, everything is an expression of Ratzon Hashem. Which means that, practically, if a person were to recognize that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is everything and anything, and that Leis Oter Ponim Minei, there's nowhere devoid of Hashem, and like the Lashon of the Balatanya, quoting from the Zohar, is Memali Kol Almin, Sovev Kol Almin, he fills all worlds, he surrounds all worlds. So if a person would understand this, says the Balatanya, we would cease to exist. This would be like the Or Hashemesh Bashemesh. That's the mashal of the Balatanya. What does that mean? Is that if I were to ask you, look at the sun and differentiate for me between the sun and the light of the sun. That's impossible, right? And yet with distance between us and the sun, you can crack open a window and you can see a unique defined ray of sunlight coming through the window. And we can say that is a ray of sunlight. It's not the sun. It's a ray of sunlight. Right? It's not the sun. But vis-a-vis the sun, it is the sun. Right? The sun, as far as the sun is concerned, all of the light that it is emitting is it. That's it. Right? That's it. That is what it is. But with distance and space in between and things in between, it becomes possible to, fictitiously to a certain extent, differentiate between the sun and the light of the sun. That's how the Balatanya explains how it is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is still infinitely HaKadosh Baruch Hu without any changes, any deviations from what HaKadosh Baruch Hu always used to be. Ani Hashem Lo Shinisi, like the Navi says, I'm Hashem, never changed, and yet there are things that exist, so to speak, independent of Hashem. Like me. I exist, so to speak, in a certain way independent of Hashem, meaning I can not think of Hashem. And yet as far as Hashem is concerned, I am a piece of Him, and as far as I'm concerned, I am not. So that distance creates two alternative perspectives. Now, our perspective is real for us, in as much as reality is defined by our experience. But as far as HaKadosh Baruch Hu is concerned, we exist within the Ratzon Hashem. Most of the time, we feel that distance. Meaning, or at least we exist as independent entities, distance from Hashem, so to speak, living as independent entities. But in spaces and places and times, and everybody has felt this emotionally, at some stage of life, some way, shape, manner, or form, that I'm really not separate from Hashem. Sometimes you feel that, like Ne'ilah Yom Kippur, really I'm an expression of the will of Hashem. I'm not really separate. Or, we'll say it in maybe a more new agey kind of way, is there are experiences that people have that we just feel like we're a part of the universe, right? Like you stand at the Grand Canyon and feel small. Not in the sense of, look at how big this is and look at how small I am, but in the grand scheme of everything, I am nothing. There's a huge, gigantic picture, and I'm just a tiny piece of something. I'm within this broad perspective, I'm just a little bit. that perspective, to a certain extent, is what a Navi feels when they experience Nevuah. The Rambam describes the feeling of a Navi having Nevuah as like losing a sense of self. It's a total hisbatlus. Like just, I'm a shell that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is filling me. It was the experience of Klal Yisrael as a whole at Matan Torah. That experience of the Jewish people at Matan Torah, where they said to Moshe Rabbeinu, please, you speak instead. Because if we hear Hashem again, we're gonna melt. We're just gonna disintegrate. We will cease to live as independent entities. That's how the Ramban and the Ibn Ezra explain the pasuk. We're just gonna not be anymore. We will completely lose our independent identity. To a large extent, this is how some of the Mefarshim explain, this is what happens to Nadav and Avihu. They entered into the Kodesh HaKodashim, and they just dissolved into Ratzon Hashem. They lost who they were completely. They just gone. Because in that space that Ratzon Hashem is revealed, so with the will of Hashem for the world to be in a particular way is, so within that space, within that place, there's no such thing as not being in accordance with Ratzon Hashem. And that, of course, is the experience of the Kohen Gadol and Yom Kippur, to stand in a place, in a time, as a person, and say, Ribono Shel Olam, I'm just plugging back into you. And that moment is terrifying, because I could lose myself there. And if I could lose myself in the sense that I'll just become batel to you, or in that space where your will is so clearly revealed, I will disintegrate because I'm not in accordance with it. Both of those things are possibilities. And you see that l'tov and l'ra, right? That's not even a significant school of thought amongst really the Midrashim and the Tanaim, and certainly the Mefarshim, the Rishonim, the Achronim, understand that what Nadav and Avihu did was because of their great tzidkus. They just dissolved into HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And then there are times that when the Aron would be present, when that would be so, that the will of Hashem just became so obvious in the world. Such that if Ratzon Hashem is that Klal Yisrael should be in Eretz Yisrael, so then the Aron makes it so. Meaning Ratzon Hashem is revealed in that moment. However, crossing over the Yarden was not a miracle as much as it was, well, yeah, that's what happens in the natural world when the will of Hashem is revealed. Like, it's just like, yeah, sure.
So lack of miracles, like you said, lack of miracles is what's wrong. You know, everything should just be a miracle all the time.
Right. It's just like, yeah, this is the way that it's supposed to be. No, Beseda. But like, yeah, the natural world is acquiesce to the will of Hashem. That's what it's supposed to do. Like, of course. And this is what Hashem wants, so that's it. The Aron is representative of that. But in order to have the Aron like that, it's terrifying. It's a very, very high level. It's a very high standard to live with. This is how many of the Mefarshim understand Shittas Rashi, at least the Machlokes Rashi Ramban, whether the Mishkan was L'chatchila or the Mishkan was B'diavad. Seems to be the way that the Sforno understands Shittas Rashi, which is the school of thought in the Medrash Rabbah, is that were it not for the Chet HaEgel, there would not have been a Mishkan. It would just have been the Aron. Right? Meaning you didn't need the Aron as the trappings to inculcate the notion of the Aron into the people. You wouldn't have needed that experience. It would have just been the Aron, would have been there, present, and people would have lived in accordance with Ratzon Hashem, and the world would have just figured itself out. It would just be Zorein. It would flow, it would work, it would be Gewaldic. So Yehoshua doesn't get a command to say that the waters of the Yarden are going to... Moshe Rabbeinu is told by Hashem, lift up your stick and I'm going to blow a big wind and then the waters are going to split. And he told them to go through on dry land. No, it's very simple. The quickest way for us to fulfill Ratzon Hashem is to walk across the Yarden. The problem is that there's a Yarden there. No, Beseda. So let's not have a Yarden there. What's the problem?
So, but if it's incidental, then what's the purpose of like Kadeshu Machar was very big parallel to Har Sinai, but there was a reason. There was an encounter.
Yeah,
and this is making it more like it's incidental.
So the point is this: it's incidental to the Aron, but it's an incredibly powerful encounter for the Jewish people to witness this.
Okay.
And Meshech Chochmah ties those two themes together.
But to prepare for,
yeah. What was the preparation? What was the preparation?
Sinai, so it was similar to.
Yeah. So what was the preparation by Har Sinai?
To wash, no.
His kadashu, meaning this is the haftarah. I mean, Yehoshua Perek Gimel is the haftarah for the first day of Pesach, because it was the same day, right? Meaning the first day of Pesach is very closely related. Pesach is related to crossing over the Yarden. Says the Meshech Chochmah, this is all that he says. This little paragraph is all that he says on the haftarah on this parak. He says, "Persis kadashu al tikshu el isha kamei b'matan Torah." Don't engage in relations. V'nira mishum de Aron habris hayu noisim hakanim lifnei am ad hayarden uvayarden, because the Aron is traveling in front of them. Ugmini de kol zman she'aron shchina sheloi b'mkaiman asurim b'tashmish hamita. Whenever the Aron is traveling, it's also b'tashmish hamita. There's a lot to say about the Gemara in Eruvin. And therefore, Yehoshua says, his kadashu, don't engage in relations. Meaning, there's a level of kedusha and an avoidance of tumah that needs to be maintained now. And we see this in many places that these things occur. For example, whenever you engage with the Aron, so the Ramban writes that the Aron Mishkan, that conglomerate, was parallel to each other. They surrounded Har Sinai and they surrounded the Mishkan. And the Torah that's given, the luchos that are given on Har Sinai, are then plugged into the Mishkan, and we are surrounding those things. But when you encounter that, when this is out in public, when this is revealed, or when you as an individual encounter it, so Moshe Rabbeinu encounters this all the time. So he lives in a world of Al Tikshu Imisha all the time. Right? Moshe Rabbeinu separates from Tzipora because he's constantly encountering this. Klal Yisrael at Matan Torah have to remove themselves from this. The Kohen Gadol going into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, that's the beginning of Maseches Yuma, has to be separated for a week beforehand, so as not to be with his wife. Anytime that one engages with the Aron, we remove ourselves from that. Now, why is not for now? We'll get there. But understand that those parallels are absolutely there. He says, get ready because you are about to encounter this. Now, it's incidental to the Aron. Of course, just the Aron is there, so this is what happens. Aron Eina Min Amida. Aron is nice as nice of. It just does those things. Because wherever the Aron needs to go, that's where it goes. And whatever happens, happens. Because it's almost as if space-time folds around the Aron as the epicenter of reality, as the expression of the will of Hashem in the world. So, yeah, everything just folds in around it.
So if you call it nice, maybe that answers the question, right? The Rambam. It's not nice.
It's not even a nice. It's just a reality. It's just...
But it's funny because they're actually further from the Aron than they normally are.
Yes.
They're making a preparation once again for an encounter, but it's really like a distance witnessing it, and they see many miracles.
Well, so the Aron goes ahead of them, but they all pass by the Aron as they cross the Aron.
Right.
They're all going to pass by it. Now, that distance is important because Moshe Rabbeinu doesn't. I mean, Aaron went ahead 3 days in order to prepare, But here the Aron is going ahead, maybe to prepare, maybe to create distance. We'll talk about that next time. Because this Aron traveling ahead of them and like just people melting in front of them doesn't really happen through the rest of the conquest. We're going to have to figure out why that is the case. But this is Pshat in the Sforna. Kuma Hashem v'yafutza evecha. Rise up, Hashem, and your enemies will be scattered. Why? Why are the enemies going to scatter? Because of course they're going to scatter. That's what happens. When Ratzon Hashem is revealed in the world, then that's it. Then that is what happens. They will disappear. They will acquiesce to the reality of Hashem, and either they will all do tshuva, or they will all disappear. This is how Chazal say that at the end of time, Kodesh Baruch Hu is going to take out the Chama Minartika. Kodesh Baruch Hu is going to take out the sun from its pocket, from its glove. And the tzaddikim are going to be warmed by it, and the Rishonim are going to be burned by it. So the Baal Shem HaKodesh, this is brought in the Todos Yaakov Yosef, so the Baal Shem HaKodesh explains, well, because tzaddikim live their lives with, Chazal said that the tzaddikim are going to be healed by it. And the Rishonim are going to be burned by it. Because for a tzaddik whose whole life is in accordance with Ratzon Hashem, so when the presence of Hashem is revealed in the world, then the blemishes that we have, like the issues that we have, the areas of our lives that are not in accordance with Ratzon Hashem, we will be healed from that because that's external to us. We'll be like, okay, I shouldn't have done that. But Rishonim, whose entire essence is they've trained themselves to doing terrible things, so if Ratzon Hashem is revealed in the world, so then that's what burns up. That's what is. This is what we say in the Rosh Hashanah davening. It's just going to disappear. So just.
Raiders of the Lost Ark got it right.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, they were onto it.
I mean, it's not in a warehouse, but no. We'll talk about where the Aron is when we get there. There's a lot to talk about. Now, we'll say this very, very quickly. Rabbeinu Bachya in Sefer Vayikra points out that Vatikahel ha'eda el Pesach al Moed, when they consecrated the Oil Moed, so the same thing happened. He says, this was all a miracle. That a small space held a tremendous amount of people. You have this. Moshe and Aron gather the people in front of the rock, and everybody gets in front of the Oil Moed, and Har Sinai. Everybody is at the foot of the same mountain, and then he quotes the Medrash. This is all Medrash and Chumah. This next piece is from our parak. It says v'kevan she'avru es hayardin nichnasu. Nichnasu kol shel bein shnei badei ha'aron. The entirety of the people passed between the stakes of the Aron. Now, what does that mean? In accordance with everything that we've just said now, Pashtus is that when the Jewish people passed by the Aron, they experienced that folding of all reality, time, and space and people into the concept of Kedusha. They experienced that. They experienced that Ratzon Hashem is now being revealed to them and through them. So the entirety of the people fits between the Badei Ha'aron. So Aron in a minute doesn't take up space. And they didn't take up space. They, like HaKadosh Baruch Hu, is of all things and in all things and surrounding all things. Klal Yisrael felt that. They felt that one with Ratzon Hashem in the universe. That this is what Hashem wants the world to be. And connected to the shlah that we learned, this is a famous Maimer Chazal. V'chein la'asid kol osan uchlusun sheyatzu me'adam harishon ad sheyichyu ha'mesim. Heichan heim ondim. How's it going to be by Tchias HaMesim that everybody that died is going to come back to life? we are going to have a problem of overpopulation. Overpopulation. V'heim asidim laima, they're going to say, tzarli makom, they're going to say there's no space. So, Goshet li v'ashiva, says the Navi Yeshayahu, they'll come close. What are we going to do? Ela ani marchivis Yerushalayim. Hashem says, I make Yerushalayim bigger. I make Yerushalayim bigger. There'll be overpopulation problem in Yerushalayim. Hashem says, don't worry, I'll make it bigger. Hashem is going to expand it out. We see this as well, that when Klal Yisrael gathered in the Mikdash, so Oimdim Tzvufim and the Mishtachavim, when they bowed down, everybody had enough space. Why? Because in the presence of bowing to Ratzon Hashem, you're one with the universe and all space and time just folds around you. That's it. That's what's going on. Is the Aron is going in front of them and everything is just folding there in front of their eyes. This is crossing the Yarden. The question is, can we conquer Eretz Yisrael like this? So Moshe Rabbeinu says yes. Moshe Rabbeinu says, yeah, that's absolutely how we're going to conquer Eretz Yisrael. Everybody's just going to run away. But a lot happened since Moshe Rabbeinu and Yehoshua. Right? A lot happened in those 40 years. And it seems to be not entirely clear that this is going to be the derech, that we conquer Eretz Yisrael. The idea is still true, but practically, there's a way to work up to that. Because we don't have Mikdash when we conquer Eretz Yisrael. That's going to take another almost 4 centuries until there's a Mikdash and Klal Yisrael is living in such a way. The Chazal tell us that there were 10 miracles that happened every day in the Mikdash. Were they utilitarian? Yes, no, sort of. The smoke always went up in a straight column. No, it just means that the wind didn't bother the Mikdash. It's Mikdash. It's wind. No flies ever entered the Beis HaMikdash. Yeah, because the flies, no, you don't go there. That's just obvious. You just don't go there. That's not a thing. At one time in Jewish history, all of these things made sense, and that was Shlomo HaMelech, Melech Sha'ashalom Shalai. He never went to war. Never went to war. Happened for a little bit. Vayanusu misanecha, mipanecha. Yeah, they just didn't get involved. They just didn't bother. It's just Ratzon Hashem was revealed in the world. Just things worked out.
It took that long for Moshe's tefillah to be answered.
It wasn't Moshe's tefillah to be answered as much as reality of the Jewish people being ready for that. Because again, to live in that way without being ready for that is death. Because if Ratzon Hashem is revealed in front of us and we are not ready for that and we are not ready for that, so then we die. That's just what happens. You're in the presence of unadulterated Ratzon Hashem and living antithetical to it, so that's terrifying. That's one of my Rebbeim in Yeshiva, Rabbi Shestab, used to say, probably still says it to the guys now, that the slogan, we want Mashiach now, I mean, we do, but like that's terrifying. Navi describes like Yom Hine Ba Yom Hashem Hagadol v'Hanoira. Noira means Gilui Shechina. Like we're pretty sure that we'll be okay because Hakadosh Baruch Hu loves us like crazy, but like it's terrifying. It's still like, it's a terrifying thing. Like.
And Yom Hashem is have to sound like they're dying.
Say what?
Yom Hashem almost seems like have to be our dying, getting punished, or presumably the same type of.
Yeah, meaning when Ratzon Hashem is revealed in the world, like either you're with it or you're not. Like I don't know. Like if you're not, like that's terrifying. That's terrifying. That's like, when the principal walks into the classroom, and like you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing. Like in one moment, like it's just absolutely obvious that your life got much more difficult. Like it's just a reality. Like now you see, and this is it. And this is the chiddush of the Chazon Yechezkel, of Chazon Abramsky, that this traveling of the Aron was without the Mishkan. This is the Aron in its purest form. The Aron as the Kohen Gadol encounters on Yom Kippur. The Aron of Moshe Rabbeinu at the top of Har Sinai coming down with luchos. This is like, so yeah, the world just falls away, melts away. Everything just acquiesces to the will of Hashem. That's the beginning. Where it goes from there, we will we'll see you next week. Thank you to everybody for joining us online and in person. And Be'ez Hashem Yisparach will to be continued.